Recording in progress.
Well, good evening, everybody, wherever you happen to be, and good evening to our contingent from Yorkshire and even those from Lancashire. I know never the twain shall meet, but here we are all together and ready for another lockdown lecture with Harif. Harif, as many of you know, is the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. We aim to educate about the history and culture of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, but of course you don't need to be one to be interested in Sephardi and Mizrahi culture and history. And I do urge you, those of you who haven't signed up to our mailing list, to do so. All you have to do is go to our wonderful new website, www.harif.org. And please do also check out our sister blog, Point of No Return, and that will keep you up to date with the news. This evening session is being live streamed to the Harif Facebook page, and there will be a video recording available on the Harif video channel, which you can access from the website. And of course, if you're on our mailing list, you will get a link. So this evening, we come back from the Amazonian rainforest where we were last week, and we're back on home turf, admittedly in Amazonian temperatures today. The title of tonight's session is Carpets, Textiles and Kiss Me Quick Hats, the Sephardim of Yorkshire. Now, Kiss Me Quick Hats perhaps deserves an explanation for those who are not familiar with this. It is a novelty that you can buy at a typical British seaside town, and of course the north of England has many of these. And apparently the full wording on the hat is "Kiss me quick, squeeze me slow." So I thought that might be an interesting factoid to share with you. Anyway, tonight we are privileged to have with us Nigel Grizzard, who actually lives in Leeds, where he is Yorkshire's Jewish tour guide. And he has been delving into the Sephardi history of Yorkshire's Sephardim. And as he was telling me, this is really a hidden history. There don't seem to be books about the subject, and Nigel really has done some very original research. So we really can't wait to hear his presentation. There will be an opportunity for questions and comments after Nigel has finished speaking. Please do type them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, over to you, Nigel.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn, and good evening to everyone, wherever you are. It's lovely to see so many old friends on the chat, to find other people who maybe have heard of me and others who are interested or linked to the Sephardim of Yorkshire. I ought to start with a bit about me and how I got into it. I was actually born in the early 1950s in Whitechapel, in the heart of London's East End, in a strangely called maternity ward, the Marie Celeste. And for those of you who know anything about history, the Marie Celeste was a ship that was found on the sea with tables laid, but no one was there. And I always thought that was a strange name for a maternity ward. And I've been on other people's tours around Whitechapel where people also said, yes, I was born in that world, and you felt some sort of companionship. The interesting thing is I was born there in the 1950s. Back in the late 1860s, sort of 80 years beforehand, the first Grizzard who was born in Britain, my great-grandfather, Joseph Grizzard, was born there. His family had arrived a few years before from Amsterdam. And when I looked up in the census, it turned out that they all lived in Freeman Street in Spitalfields, which was a Dutch Ashkenazi enclave. But I didn't spend more than 8 days, I'm told, in the London hospital, and I was whisked off to grow up in Redbridge in northeast London. In the early 1970s, I worked for the Board of Deputies of British Jews as a statistician. I met Abram Marks, who was then the chief executive, who'd been very involved with the Jews of Aden, and I became interested in the colony of Aden. But in 1976, I moved north to work as a policy officer for Bradford City Council. But although I was working in Bradford, I decided to live in Leeds, where there was a larger Jewish community, and it was only 10 miles away. So I arrived in Leeds in West Yorkshire in 1976 from home in Redbridge. And as I drove up the Harrogate Road into the then Jewish suburb of Moortown, I passed what was called the New Central Vilna Synagogue. When I mixed with the Jewish community, they used words that were new to me. They said bulki, which was for a challah roll, suki instead of sukkah, matzi for matzah, and a strange word, a shopki, which was for a small subsistence shop. And going in Leeds, I felt it was still like the Lithuanian shtetl transplanted to West Yorkshire. Over in Bradford, 10 miles away, where I worked for the local authority, I met the Jews. They were German, they were Austrian, they were Czech. And in fact, the original Jewish settlers in the 19th century in Bradford were German Jews coming to work in the city's textile industry. They'd come to grow the wool capital of the world. And interestingly, the first rabbi, Rabbi Strauss, went for a job at West London Synagogue. But they took one look at him, got him to speak German, told him his German was too guttural, and they said, go straight to Bradford. There are German Jews there who need a rabbi in the synagogue. Before and after the Second World War, many Jews from Europe made new lives in Bradford, working in the city's textile industry or as doctors and dentists. And we, in fact, as my wife and I, used to go to wheat-so-dos in fine houses where nearly everyone spoke German as a native language, and the food was Middle Europe at its best, and especially its most lavish. And so if Leeds was Lithuania and Bradford was Middle Europe transplanted, where did the Sephardim fit in? Well, in my years in Leeds, I've become the Jewish Heritage Guide for Yorkshire. People have talked to me about various Sephardi families who've made new lives in Yorkshire. And tonight, after a lot of research, I'm very pleased to talk on this topic. This is the first time I've given the talk. I've had lots of people give me information, and I think it's the start of what could be a much larger project. This is a snapshot, an opening chapter in part of what I consider to be a semi-forgotten world. For those of you like me who've been to the Harif lockdown lectures, certain themes keep coming up. What was life like for Jewish refugees? Why do Iraqi Jews turn up everywhere? Sephardi Jews were often the merchant class. Jewish merchants in Alexandria in Egypt built villas. People were always running off to South America. There was a strong connection between Argentina, Brazil, and Sephardim. And the other interesting one was Sir Victor Sassoon, who had a great love of the turf and horse racing, who said, the Jews are the great, there is but one race greater than the Jews, the Derby. And finally, for those of you who heard Dr. Shaul Zadka speak last week, there were the Moroccans. So all of these people turn up in my journey across Yorkshire. Absolutely fascinating. So looking at the cities, the big cities, Leeds was the clothing city. Montague Burton, a Jew who'd come from Lithuania, was the main man par excellence. He had a huge factory in Leeds with 10,500 workers. East European Jews owned clothing factories. They worked in them. But very interestingly, there was also a textile quarter for textile merchants and traders in York Place in the city centre. Bradford was the wool capital of the world, a city that was exceedingly rich, but also had exceedingly poor neighbourhoods as well. And when I take tours of Bradford, I often tell people I remember seeing for the first time a horse in the kitchen. And they say to me, really, horses in the kitchen? Or else if they worked in Bradford, they say, yes, I remember that. But the interesting thing about Bradford, it was a great place for enterprise and startup. And Bradford was good to the Jews, and the Jews were good to Bradford. And Hull was and is a place and a port of entry and transmigration for literally hundreds of thousands of Jews heading off to lives in the New World. But the early settlers, before the rush came from Poland and Russia, were in the 18th century were Dutch Jews. Ashkenazim and Sephardim mingled together. So that's a bit of background. And let's start with a map of Yorkshire. So here we have a map of Yorkshire. You can see we've got Leeds, we've got Bradford, we've got Hull, we've got the beautiful Yorkshire coast, and further up, just outside Yorkshire, we've got Newcastle upon Tyne, and though it doesn't show it, just south of Newcastle upon Tyne is the city of Sunderland, famous for the Stadium of Light and famous for football fans, but it will also appear later on in my talk. So if we move on, I want to show you this. This is a Sephardim miniature Sefer Torah. You can buy them in Israel. And one day when I was leaving a walk in Bradford, one of my participants at the end said, I've got a few things to you. She went to a car and she brought out the Sefer Torah and said, look, this was my mum's. You must have it because you'll know what to do with it. And I asked her about her mum, and she said her mum was from Tunisia. She'd met she'd met a British serviceman during the war, when he was involved in the North Africa campaign. She'd come to live in Grimsby and been part of the Grimsby Jewish community. So here we have a beautiful Sephardi miniature Sefer Torah, which was given me by a walk participant. Just to tell you, it's a printed one. It's not a handwritten one. And when I work with school kids, we talk about it and I show them it. So they also show them, that there are other Sefer Torahs apart from the traditional Ashkenazi ones. So that's a nice aside. And now we start on our adventure and we go to Hull. So this is the coat of arms of the city of Hull. And on the left is the Hull History Centre. And the Hull History Centre celebrated the 250th anniversary of Hull's Jewish community a few years ago. Also, through Dr. David Lewis, they had literally hundreds and hundreds of feet of Hull Jewish archives, which were in the synagogue, and they were taken and catalogued and put in the Hull History Centre. Some very interesting things about Hull Jewry. As I said, Hull was a port. And for those of you who've got a good memory, last week, Shaul Zadka talked about a guy called Zvi Migdal, who ran an organization that ran girls to South America, not for very good reasons, to work in prostitution. And one of the interesting things we found in the Hull History Centre, when we were looking through it, was a book which listed single girls who'd come from Eastern Europe to Hull, and the Hull Jewish community took their names and their destinations and made sure that they got safely there and that they weren't taken by white slavers. But my talk isn't about the Ashkenazim, it's about the Sephardim. And I was told that the earliest we could find settlers in the 19th century, including a lady from London called Abigail Garcia, who married Benjamin Marks in London and came to live in Hull. She died in 1850 and was buried in Hull. Also, other families turned up in Hull, and one was with a very common Sephardi named Toledano. The families were entertainers, and they came from London to Hull in the 1840s. And another person who was in Hull was the Duveen family, Sir Jacob Duveen. And he was born in Hull. He's had a Dutch Sephardi father. He's married an antique dealer, and he'd become one of the world's greatest art dealers. And he'd given many paintings to the Ferrens Art Gallery in Hull. Hull is a fascinating place to visit. There's a lot of Jewish history there, but everyone talks about it as an Ashkenazi history. But really, it was more than that. There was a whole Sephardi heritage which is slowly being uncovered. But we move on, and we go on from Hull to talk about a paper that my researcher found for me. Now, there's a lady called Aviva Ben-Ur. She's at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. And in May 2014, she wrote a paper, Identity Imperative, Ottoman Jews in Wartime and Interwar Britain. And any of you who are involved with Holland Park Synagogue will know that many of the people who started that synagogue, I think, were Ottoman Jews and were carpet traders. That's right, isn't it? So I got this paper. My researcher, Carol Davies, found it. And Carol's been a great inspiration for me for this talk, because Carol grew up in an area of Leeds called the Sandmoors. Leeds was, as a Jewish community, it was very much based on class. And if you said where you lived, you knew exactly which class you were. The workers lived in one place, the middle class lived in the others, and there was a further class of people called the Pompies or the Betters who lived in the Sandmoors. And Carol lived in the Sandmoors, and she told me that there used to be all these Sephardi families there. And what was interesting was, when I started reading the paper, the first person that Aviva talks about is a man called Morris Mercado. He's a merchant of Persian, Turkish, and Indian carpets. He'd come from Istanbul to Britain. In 1914, he was categorized as an enemy alien, but he avoided losing his business or being interned or deported. And at the end of World War I, he applies for naturalization, but he's not a Turk. He proclaims himself, because of his origin, a Spanish Jewish citizen. He has a long battle, but in 1927, he's naturalized. And then I looked in the London Gazette and I said, where did he live? And you've guessed it, his address is given as 30 Savile Road, Chapeltown in Leeds. So we find, that this academic paper focuses on a Sephardi Jew in Leeds. And interestingly, reading through it, some of the other names she'd been and managed to get the naturalization records were these other Sephardi Jews. So Mikado was from a group of Jews from Istanbul who'd come to Leeds to trade. They founded a synagogue and they called it the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue. And it now still exists. It's a terraced house and it has a plaque on it that said, the House of Faith. And what's interesting is this synagogue, it says this house reflects the ever-changing community in Chapeltown. Built soon after 1860 for residents of the affluent middle-class suburb, in 1924, it became a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. From 1952 to 1966, the Sinai Synagogue. From 1961 to 1974, as the Jinnah Mosque, it was the first mosque in Leeds. And then today, it is a series of flats. So this building exists, and I've been trying to find out something about it and its records, and we haven't had much luck. We do know, however, among the families who came, the following names turn up. We found the Angels, the Pitchons, the Barkeys, the Beckors, the Mikados, and we think there were maybe 30 or more Sephardi Jewish families in Leeds. The Angels, the Barkeys, the Beckors had textile warehouses in York Place in the centre of Leeds, while the Pitchons had premises in Mill Street in Bradford. Now we'll move on. And what's interesting is, on the left, I've managed to find the 10 Commandments that were on the Ark of the original Sephardi synagogue. These 10 Commandments, what happened was the Ark from the original Sephardi synagogue became the Ark for the Sinai Reformed synagogue. The Sinai moved their synagogue from Chapeltown to Moortown, and in their new premises, they erected the Ark. And they then redid it and put a much more modern Ark on, but they kept the Sephardi 10 Commandments. And these 10 Commandments exist as you come into the sanctuary of the synagogue. So there they are. And very interestingly, I had a chat with a friend of mine called Joe Bromberg, who grew up in Bradford, moved to Leeds. And Joe told me that when they cut off the 10 Commandments, at the same time, there was the cabinet, which was the Ark. And he and some friends got hold of this very heavy Ark. They put it in a van and they took it to the Reformed Synagogue in Bradford, where it became used as the Ark in the Strauss room. And on the right is the picture of the bottom of the Ark. So one day the job is to reunite the two, to clean up the Ark and to give it its full glory. So there we are, and that's the Sephardi Ark. The Ark of the Sephardi Shawl in Leeds in two parts. One day it'll be reunited. And I think it's the first time anyone's ever seen the two parts linked together in a photo. But moving on, we found that there's a site called Leodis, which has lots of old pictures of Leeds. And looking through, we found this picture of York Place. And you can see on it, you can see the name of Moshe Barkey, who was a Turkish textile merchant. You can see the name of Behar, who was a textile merchant. And we also know that the Angels were textile merchants there as well. So this was York Place. And while the Leeds Jews were involved in what they call in Yiddish, the Schneiderei, the clothing industry, the Sephardim were the merchant class being involved as textile merchants. Jews also worked in Bradford, and another family that was mentioned to me called the Pitchons had premises in Mill Street. Mill Street exists on the left. You can see one of these huge textile warehouses, and a number of Jews, Sephardim and Ashkenazim, had textile warehouses in this part of Bradford. Now moving on, I talked about the villas, and very interestingly, we found, I actually haven't got the cover, but we found it on the internet. It says here, Monsieur Henry Angel, who came from Turkey, who had his business at 3 York Place. And on the left was the villa that he built in 1939. And for those who know the city of Leeds, if you go back to Leeds in the 1930s, most of the Ashkenazi Jews are trying to get out of the first ghetto of the Leylands to make it to Chapeltown, sort of an area of terraced housing, and maybe a few better off ones were moving up to Moortown, where they had semi-detached houses. But the Sephardim built their own houses, and this is a picture of 14 Sandmore Avenue, taken when I was walking a few weeks ago. The house still exists, and we found that at 14 Sandmore Avenue lived the Angels. The Barkeys, their neighbours, were Sephardi Jews, lived at number 12, and across the road the Pitchons lived opposite at number 11. Number 11 has since been demolished, and they've built two footballers' houses, as you call them, wonderful residences for up-and-coming new bourgeois in Leeds. So they were the merchant class. They built villas, and it's interesting because we heard in Alexandria that in the 30s Jews were building villas, and Sephardi Jews in the same way were building villas in Leeds. And this house is still in Jewish hands. It went from the Angel family sold it to a Turkish family, and then they sold it to a Turkish-Jewish family, and then they sold it to an Ashkenazi family. But the synagogue they founded was in a house, as I said, was in a house, and that house exists. The houses, the Ark exists, the houses the Sephardi merchants lived in. But what we can't find, in a sense, is there's no Sephardi community at the moment in Leeds. Most of the people who we talk about move on. Their descendants leave Leeds. There are still people in Leeds who, if you ask them and say, go deep into their family, they may say, well, I do remember, yes, this one, my grandfather or this was from the Sephardi community. And anyone who's got mementos and can talk about it, I'd like to hear from them. I also must tell you, because I mentioned the name Toledano earlier on, I was in Cullingworth. It's a village in Bingley Rural Ward, outer part of Bradford. And I met a lady called Catherine Toledano. And it was fascinating meeting Catherine because she brought with her a family tree that stretched from Livorno in Italy to Salonika to Tangier to North and South America. She told me her grandfather, Ezio Toledano, was descended from an Italian family who'd come to Manchester and then they moved to Leeds. But what fascinated me more was I was good friends with Catherine's cousin, and I had no idea that he had a Sephardi grandmother. And, this keeps coming up more and more and more. So moving on, I wanted to tell you a bit about the Sephardi families and the Second World War. And this is a picture of the Dunera. It was a ship that I knew about. It was an internment ship. For those who are involved in Ashkenazi history, and especially German and Austrian Jewish history, World War II, the Dunera was a very important ship. 2,000 Jews from Austria and the Czech Republic were sent to an internment camp in Hay in Australia. And I remember being in Chigwell as a child. I had a friend called Stephen Schick, and his dad, Walter Schick, was from Vienna. And Walter told me he'd been deported to Australia on the Dunera. And he told me that there was one problem in the internment camp, one very interesting thing. The interesting thing was that there were 10 academics for every ordinary person in the camp, because they were all German and Austrian Jews. And the other interesting thing he told me was that the only shortage they had in Australia was a shortage of toilet paper. And if you talk to many of the survivors of the Dunera, they tell you that they were treated quite badly on the ship. They go to Australia, they come back to Britain, and by the end of the Second World War, they're in the British Army, and they're back in Germany or Austria interrogating Nazis because they speak very good German, and they can tell who's telling lies and who's telling what these characters had been up to in World War II. But why do I mention the Dunera? Because very interestingly, among the people I met was a guy called Guy Pitchon, who lived in Manchester, and he told me that he had an uncle called Bert Angel, and he knew that Bert had been deported to Australia, that Bert had grown up in Leeds from a Turkish family, and it was the first time I heard about Turkish Jews being interned in Australia during World War II. He also told me that Bert, having left Australia, had gone off to South America, and he really wasn't very happy with the British. Now, I wanted to find some more information out about Bert, and I knew that there was one person who'd helped me, and that's a researcher called Rachel Pistol, and she's the expert on internment during World War II. Rachel's at King's College, she lives in Devon, And all you need to do is email Rachel the name of someone who was interned, and you get in 2 or 3 days back a whole piece of information about them. And I've been in touch with her before, and she said to me, well, how come you know so many people who are interned? I said, well, it's my age. I was born in the 50s. Most of the people, my friends' parents in the 40s, if they come from Germany, had ended up being interned. But what was interesting was, I said to her, we wanted to know about this Turkish Jew called Bert Angel. And she found me some things, and then her husband sent me an email. And he said, look, I bought a book at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, as you do, and I just happened to be reading it, and it was written by a guy called Kurt Lewinsky, who turned out had been in Leeds, and he writes a diary of his time in the 1940s, and he tells how the German Jews plus Bert Angel are interned, and they meet Bert Angel and they become good friends. And Bert goes with them to Australia, and because he's come as a youngster from Turkey, he's much more understanding of English language, English customs, and he helps all these German Jews and Austrian Jews and tells them how to behave in Britain. And then something happens. They go through the records and they realize that Bert shouldn't be there. So in December the 1st, 1940, Bert is released. He gets notification. And on the 9th of December, the Sergeant Major wakes him up at an unearthly hour and says, Bert, you're off. And Bert goes off to South America, bids farewell to everyone. And Lewinsky writes how he's lost a friend. So this is an interesting story, you know, that even Sephardi Jews were interned during World War II. We move on 18 years and we find the London Gazette. And very interestingly, it says, notice is hereby given that the partnership, good legal language, heretofore subsisting between Henry Becher Angelo of 9 Square Lamartine, Paris, France, Maurice Becher Angel of 14 Saint-Maur Avenue, the house I showed you, Leeds, and Bert Angel of 1702 Pampa, Buenos Aires, Argentina, carry on business as cloth merchants and shippers at 3 York Place, Leeds, in the county of York, under the style or firm of H.M.B. and B. Angel, has been dissolved by effluxion of time as from the 30th day of June 1958. Dated the 1st day of July 1958, Aubrey Kramer, 79 Albion Street, Leeds, solicitor the said Henry Becher Angelo, Maurice Becher Angel, Bert Henry Angel. So this was one of these textile businesses dying off, and you know, the South America link keeps coming. So that's one Holocaust story, or one link internment. And there's another very interesting one turns up. So I have a friend called Marshall Freeze. Marshall is a great guy. He's very much involved with kosher food supplies for Pesach in Leeds. And he said to me, he said, you know, my mum comes from Salonika. And this is a picture of the Tarragano family from Salonika. Fascinating story. His grandfather had worked for the British Embassy in Istanbul, I think, or certainly somewhere in the Salonika, Istanbul belt, and got British citizenship. And this Tarragano family ought to be, or could be, the story of a whole, you know, it's a subject for a whole lecture. But this is mum and dad and the 6 girls. And what's interesting is they managed to survive the war because, as you know, the Sephardi Jews in Salonika had a very rough time. There's a whole story to be told about that, Lynn. You know, they had an Austrian chief rabbi, and it was felt that because they had an Austrian chief rabbi, the Germans were able to manipulate the Salonika Jews using the chief rabbi much more than if they'd had a Sephardi rabbi. It's a whole controversy there. But the Tarragano family came from Salonika. Dad had British citizenship. And because of that, he goes through a whole series of German camps with his family, and they survive. And finally, with a prisoner exchange before the end of the war, all 8 of them managed to get out. And they get out, they move to Hull, and then deciding that Hull's not for them, they move to Batley. Now, I don't know what any of my viewers tonight are followers of politics, but you may know that Tracy Brabin has become Mayor of West Yorkshire, and there's going to be a Batley by-election. It's a key question for Keir Starmer, whether Labour retains the seat or whether George Galloway takes the Muslim vote away from the Labour Party. So who knows what's going to go on. But what's interesting is that the Tarragano family come to Batley. And also they tell me they've had enough. You know, they've been through the war, they've had terrible things, and they decide, you know, it's time to merge in and to become part of West Yorkshire life. And then a very interesting thing happens. And I was told this by the youngest of the Tarragano family, who's now Mrs. Freeze, and who lives in Ra'anana in Israel. And she said that one day a guy comes knocking door to door. He's selling saucepans and kettles. She can't afford to buy from him because Batley is not exactly a wealthy place, and they were desperately poor there. And they both realized they're Jews. So he says to her, you know, this isn't a place to live. Come and live in Leeds. And the Tarragano family moved from Batley to Leeds and rejoined Jewish life. And again, there's this whole story to be told. And in fact, while I was looking through it, if you put Tarragano into AJR, there's a whole story about the family that appears on one of the information lists about one of the information lists, you know, about what happened to families during the war. So this is another Sephardi story that links to the war, to the Shoah, and it links to West Yorkshire. I'm sure there are other Sephardi stories to link with the Shoah, but I've at least found 2 to go for the talk. But we've got a lot to talk on, so we'll move on. And I want to talk a bit about the Rabbonim, because again, you think of Leeds and Bradford having Ashkenazi Rabbonim, and we've identified, I think, 6.5, and I'll explain why there's a half, Sephardi Rabbonim who've been in Leeds. Now, up on the top left is, you see the guy with the hat on, he's Rabbi David Izagui. He was from Morocco, he was a shochet, he was a moil. For those of you who listened to Dr. Zadka last week, I think he said he was in Indonesia, and they asked him first if he was a rabbi, and secondly, if he was a moil. Well, he wasn't. He said he couldn't carry out a Brit, a circumcision, but if he'd had Rabbi Izagui with him, he would have carried it out. And I'd seen Rabbi Izagui in action at a friend's child's Brit, and Rabbi Izagui was very quick, very sharp. He came in, he wished all the family mazel tov, he did the Brit, and he was out of the door. And Rabbi Izagui was part of that group of people who helped Jewish communities function. With him is a friend called David Mankoff, and the picture shows him at a simcha. And one day, please God, we'll get back to simchas where we can sit around tables and have food and network, and we won't be worried about social distancing. He moved on to Manchester and then to Israel. And next to him underneath him is my friend, Rabbi Shamaria. The Rabbi Shamaria was from California. He was from a family who'd come from Rhodes in Greece. He became rabbi of the Beis HaMedrash HaGadol, which is one of Leeds' big 3 Ashkenazi communities. And it was interesting that an Ashkenazi community has a Sephardi role. Now, those of you who follow the royals know that a particular Californian recently has had a bit of trouble when she had a sojourn in England. And Rabbi Shamaria, I think, had a disconnect, especially with the old men in his shul. They couldn't at times get on with an Ashkenazi rabbi, or some of the Sephardi rabbi. And I remember in a morning service, if Rabbi Shamaria gave a quote, they'd immediately run and say, "Are you sure that's the right quote, Rabbi?" But with Rabbi Shamaria, life was great fun. It was never dull. He made Arya, he went to live in Beit El, and he died a few years ago, tragically very young. But he's the second of the Sephardi Rabbonim in the Leeds. And the third is Rabbi Nissim, who's now in London, who runs a counseling service and a kollel, and he was student chaplain in Leeds. And I have a lot of clear memories of Rabbi Nissim. I remember one day we were all taking our coats off, you know, the sun was coming out, it was warm for us northerners, but for him who'd come from London, he still had his overcoat on. He hadn't got used to the cold, and he couldn't appreciate, you know, that a few degrees above freezing meant that you were able to take your coat off. Moving on, this is a picture of Menwith Hill. And Menwith Hill, I don't know whether those in Leeds and Harrogate should definitely know Menwith. For those of you outside, you mostly haven't heard of it. But Menwith Hill is a US base. It's a spy base run by the National Security Agency in the same way a bit like GCHQ. They listen for electronic noise. And if you ever go to Harrogate, you have to go out there, especially as it's getting dark. These are huge golf ball structures called radomes, and they are very, very spooky. But what's interesting is Menwith Hill has a chaplain. And the chaplain in the early 2000s was Rabbi Sasson. He wasn't just the Jewish chaplain, he was the chaplain for the whole base. He was a Sephardi Rav. He was actually born in Britain. He studied at the Shimar Sephardic Center in Jerusalem, and he spent a number of years in West Yorkshire officiating as chaplain for all faiths, which I find very interesting, at Menwith Hill, which is this base. There's a picture of him lighting the Hanukkah lamps, and I'm told now that he's back in the States at West Point Military, and he's a lieutenant colonel. So maybe that's another person who could speak to, a lieutenant colonel in the US military who's a Sephardic. So that's Chaplain Rabbi Cecil. And finally, I come to Rabbi Moshe Perez, who's a great guy. Rabbi Perez spoke to the Harrogate community earlier this year about his journey, which started in Casablanca. He left there at the age of 10 to go to yeshiva in New Jersey. He'd been to Israel. He'd become an electrical engineer. He'd had rabbinical service. He'd been in Dublin, in Belfast, Nottingham. He's now based in Manchester. And he comes over. The Harrogate community have ministers on rotation, and Rabbi Perez is one of their ministers. The picture of him is taken at the Beth Shalom, which is a Holocaust center in Newark, which was set up by the Smith family. Very interesting and worthwhile place to visit. And Rabbi Perez contacted me today. He sent me an email, and it was interesting that the reference was the Ministry of Justice. And it turns out that as well as being a rabbi to communities, he's also the rabbi at Nottingham Prison, and I think one or two other establishments as well. So within the prison service, there's a Sephardi Moroccan rabbi. So if anyone is unfortunate to go to a men's prison, you know, they can always say, well, if I go to Nottingham, I'll have a Sephardi chaplain to talk to me. So he's another of the Rabbanim. And again, it was fascinating listening to his story about how he went, you know, literally as a 10-year-old, they put him on a plane and they sent him, as you do in the early 60s, they sent him to New Jersey, they sent him with food, they sent him with everything, and how, you know, he has advanced learning, but in Ashkenazi world. And I mentioned a half, and my half is my friend, Rabbi Joel Top. I met Joel on Sunday morning at Chabad in Leeds. We were both going to Dublin. His mum's from Tunisia, his father's from an Ashkenazi family, and he'd learned in Lubavitch Yeshiva. So I said to him, I said, are you Ashkenazi or Sephardi? And he said, half and half, replied. Educated by the Ashkenazim, but in my heart, I'm Sephardi. I'm a Sephardi. And I thank him for this, which seems to be a common theme among many who come from the sort of one Sephardi and one Ashkenazi background. Now, I said we were going to move on a bit, and we are. We're going to Sunderland, because Sunderland, although it's not in Yorkshire, it features in my talk, and it's an important place. An important place in the talk, Sunderland. Why Sunderland in time and where? Because there was a yeshiva in Sunderland. And after the Second World War, there was literally a dearth of Ashkenazi Bochrim. The Jewish boys in Britain didn't want to go to yeshiva. And everyone else in Europe had been died never in the Shoah, in the Holocaust. And there were two rabbis, Rabbi Waltler and Rabbi Zahn. And they decided they wanted to continue the religious tradition, so they went recruiting, and they used to go recruiting to Morocco to bring the Jewish boys back. And they came from Morocco at the age of 13, and they came to learn in the Sunderland Yeshiva. Now, Sunderland has a Jewish website. Even though the Jewish community, which once was two shores, a yeshiva, and thousands of Jews, has all gone, it lives on through its Facebook page, which is coordinated by David Gordon from Leeds. And what was interesting was while I was reading it, just after Pesach, there was an article that they reprinted from a magazine called Mishpacha. It seems everything was very timely. And it was called Out from the Cold, April the 7th, 2021, by Ricky Goldstein. And she chronicled the Moroccan Sunderland story about how all these boys came to attend the yeshiva. And it was also very, very tough for them. The first problem was that the weather in Sunderland is colder than the weather in Leeds. And if you come from Tangier or Fez or Tetuan, it's not really the thing you're used to. And I read interesting stories of boys running around. They realize they're going to Sunderland, and they realize someone says you need a coat. And they go into these shops in Morocco to see if anyone has a winter coat that will be fit for a northeast winter. The second thing is the cuisine at the yeshiva in Sunderland wasn't, shall we say, gourmet. It was what we might call Ashkenazi stodge. And if you were used to, good Sephardi cuisine, and we've seen, all these wonderful recipes in our earlier talks, you'll realize, that life wasn't so good for them. And finally, the conditions in Sunderland weren't necessarily that good. I was told, well, it was a bit run down. And for those of you in London, remember Stamford Hill and Stoke Newington in the 50s and 60s. So a window broke, so maybe you'd repair it, or maybe you'd put some cardboard up. And it wasn't so good for them. But despite all these problems of settling into the Northeast, the Bochurim become Rabbonim in the UK and beyond. So what jobs do they get? This is very interesting. Some of them were shocklin, slaughterers for kosher meat. Some of them were molim, they brisked, they circumcised boys. And in fact, the Sunderland Yeshiva in Britain provides the religious infrastructure for the Ashkenazi community. So when you need someone to make kosher meat, when you need someone to circumcise your child, Rabbi Zagwi is a classic person. The Moroccan Sephardim would do that work. There weren't that many pulpits for them. So when all the Moroccan and Algerian, Tunisian Jews go to France, that's where they migrate to find jobs. And also interestingly, one other person who came through Sunderland was a person called Diana Moore. Diana Moore was a rabbi in Manchester. He used to come over to Leeds to sit on the Leeds Beth Din. He also used to be the supervisor at the Rapperson's Kosher Matzah factory. And then he went to London to sit on the Sephardi Beth Din. So, he started off from Morocco. He'd come from Fez to Sunderland, and he'd ended up on the Sephardi Beth Din in London. In fact, the Sunderland Yeshiva still exists. It moved to Gateshead in 1988. And I think there's a talk to be given by someone who knows that whole world much better than I do on the Sephardi Rabbonim trained in the northeast of England, especially the cross-cultural perspective of Sephardi tradition in an Ashkenazi world. Very, very interesting question. When if any of you have been to a typical Ashkenaz or even a Chabad service, there are always stories about certain people, about the rich man, the poritz, about the ox cart, about the innkeeper, about the tzaddik, and so it goes on. And no one ever tells any stories about the keddy, the judge, or any of the other people that used to appear maybe in Iraqi or North African stories. So again, another topic to research. Going on, I wanted to talk about the Exodus from Egypt, because that again has come up. We've had all sorts of interesting stories. And during World War II, we have to go back there. There was a huge industrial estate next to Leeds Bradford Airport. There was an aircraft factory with an indoor area of 1.5 million square feet, working 24 hours a day to produce Lancaster bombers. 17,500 people lived there, and they had to bus in workers and also provide temporary housing. So in a place called Greenbanks in Horsforth, they built a hostel. And on the left, you can see a map that shows the outline, and I'll tell you about the picture on the right. So conditions at the hostel were basic. They were poor. Living conditions were Spartan. After World War II, the hostel's still there. Poles and Ukrainians who couldn't go home were housed in the hostel. And then in 1956 comes the Exodus from Egypt. And I saw mention of the Greenbanks hostel in Lynn's wonderful book. She just mentioned that Jews had come to Leeds, or to the Leeds area, and she mentioned this hostel. Greenbanks was one of those World War II premises. I remember some of them, and I'm sure others of you of my age do, that were lying empty in the 1950s, which government knew could be ready in times of crisis to house refugees. And Horsforth was not part of Leeds then. It was an adjacent urban district, and into this hostel came refugees from Egypt, Maltese people, Italians, and Jews. It had 611 residents in April 57. There were 611 resident capacity. By April 57, there were 498 people there. By the January 58, there were only 115. And there was also an organization called the AERB, the Anglo-Egyptian Resettlement Board, and I'm sure its minutes will be a treasure trove for researchers. Now, I met Sam Levy in Leeds, who came from Egypt. He stayed in the city. He was one of the people who lived in this hostel. He told me about the rough conditions, a whole family living in one room, and he was given an allowance of 2 shillings. For the younger of you, that's 10 pence a week. The Egyptians at Horsforth, Jews, Maltese, and Italians were refugees. It was a very hard life. And in fact, there was mention of the problems that the refugees experienced in letters sent by the clerk of the Horsforth Urban District Council to the Home Office. And there's also a document in the National Archives about Greenbank's Hostel, which needs looking at. Unfortunately, when we went to look for the minutes of the Horsforth District Council in the Horsforth Museum, we found all the minutes up to 1955, and then from 1958 onwards, but for 56 and 58, they've disappeared. And this picture, you can see these rough rundown houses, was sent to me by a lady called Lynn Sasson. She was born after them, but that's her mum, her dad, and her brother and two sisters taken in the hostel in Greenbanks where they stayed. And it was rough. I haven't been able to find anyone who remembers it, because by the time I found out about it, all the people who'd been involved had either died or were too old, or their memory had gone to tell me about it. But we know that Rabbi Solomon Brown of Leeds, he was in fact the Rav who married my wife and I, used to visit the refugees in the hostel. The Jewish Welfare Board used to meet them. And we know that some of them, Sam Levy and his sister, married people from Leeds, while others said, right, we've had enough of the north of England, let's go to London where we can live a better life. But I think it echoes, that life for refugees was hard. These Jews were real refugees. They came, they weren't feather bedded or anything like that. There wasn't, some wonderful place for them, a 5-star hotel for them to bed down in. They had to start their life again. And what's happened to Greenbanks? Well, as you would imagine, in the 1960s, the whole place was flattened, a housing estate was built, and it's now only a memory. And again, if anyone can help with Greenbanks, tell me. But not all the Egyptians had a rough time. And here we find in Bradford, a firm called Ibertex, just round the corner from where the Pitchons were, in a place called Canal Road. Ibertex Limited, worsted manufacturers and exporters, set up by the Bambidge family. And I met Charles Bambidge, who'd been born in Egypt in 1954 in Cairo. Charles told me that his dad had traded with people in Bradford. So he'd gone to Bradford early on, before Suez. He'd set up in business. He found that he was an alien, so he couldn't set up in business. So he had a Jewish solicitor, and he was like his sleeping partner, and he set up a textile trading company. He'd been used to buying from textile traders in Bradford. And when you're buying, life is easy. When you're selling, it's something, when you're trying to sell to people, it's something else. And he found it hard to start business. But he set up Ibertex. The sign still exists. The firm I don't think exists anymore, but it was very successful. And if you go to the synagogue I worship in, the big synagogue, the BHH in Leeds, you'll see that the main hall is called the Irving Bambidge Hall, named after Zaki Bambadji, who changed his name to Irving Bambidge. And Charles, in fact, told me, his son, that the first year in Leeds, the family lived in the Victoria Hotel in Bradford before moving to the suburb of Shipley. And as I've said, Bradford was very, if you went to shore, there were all these German Jews, and a few Russians. And, you're a Sephardi family, what do you do? And as luck would have it, there's a lady called Maureen Salem, she may or may not be watching tonight. Maureen lives in Ilkley, and Maureen told me that her dad was a Mancunian from a Sephardi family who come from Aleppo. And they met the Bambadges, so they had friends. And when you have friends, life can go on. And, Bradford was this great city built on work and enterprise. The textile industry of the 50s, 60s, and 70s was prosperous before it all collapsed when the mills closed in the 70s and early 80s. The Bambidges did well, and then like most of Bradford's Jews, they left. Many Bradford Jews left for London, some left for Israel, some left for Manchester, and lots of others like the Bambidges moved to Leeds. So Charles Bambidge told me about his family. He's got an Egyptian birth certificate, and he's part of the Leeds community, but he's got those roots in Egypt. I now want to change my background if I can, because we're going to go off to the coast, which I'm really looking forward to, because as we know, staycation is the big thing these days. So let's have a nice view, and we're going off to the coast. We're going off to Scarborough. But as we go to Scarborough, we take the A64. We bypass York, and if you're going on the bus, you go through the town of Moulton, but but in a car you don't on the main road. But we're going to go through the town of Moulton. And let's go on. Here we are in the town of Malton. And who turns up but our old friends, the Reuben brothers. Now, I told you that, you know, Sir Victor had said that there's but one race greater than the Jews. That's the Derby. And we find that the Reuben brothers are very involved in horse racing. There is in Malton, which is a town famous for its food and gin and its distilleries. There's also Jack Berry House. And Jack Berry House is a place where jockeys who've had an accident are rehabilitated. And the Reuben brothers gave this pool, this hydrotherapy pool, to Jack Berry House. So again, you know, another Sephardi connection I didn't even know of. I was just casting around, and I found that here in Malton, in North Yorkshire, we find the Reuben brothers. So if we go on, and here we are in Scarborough on the coast. Scarborough is a wonderful place. I'm sitting now with the whole view of Scarborough behind me. This is the view from one of the cliff lifts, and this is a view of the past of Salman's gift shop. Now, we said that Iraqis get everywhere, and I'm pleased that Edward Salman and his wife are on the call from are watching tonight from Scarborough, and also Edward's niece Jackie Fader, who originally was from Scarborough, is talking as well. And Edward told me that 4 generations of the Salman family, originally from Baghdad, settled in Scarborough. Edward told me that his father, Guji Salman, left Baghdad in 1916 to avoid conscription and possibly certain death in the Turkish army. The Turks were fighting with the German, conscripts were sent to the Russian front, and Jews didn't have much hope. So Guji Salman, after journeying to Alexandria, to Bombay, arrives in Britain in 1919. He has a widowed mother, 2 younger brothers, and 4 sisters who he felt a responsibility to support. Guji had uncles in Manchester, and they advised him to set up business in a seaside town. He moves to Scarborough, rents a shop, and started. And he was later followed, Guji, by his younger brother, Naji, who comes in his teens in the 1920s. And Edward tells me the seasides were very popular among the working classes and slowly the growing middle classes. And again, as we see, as history repeats itself, we're all going to Scarborough or having staycations again. And only when foreign holidays caught on in the 80s did it slow down. But growing visitors meant there was great trade opportunities. So seaside resorts provided opportunities for trade and business. Edward told me he was elected a member of Scarborough Council for 30 years. He was the leader of the Conservative group, chairman of the important tourism committee. And he said because of his civic involvement, he was able to have lunch with Prince Charles, meet 2 prime ministers, one of whom was Margaret Thatcher, met cabinet ministers, met personalities such as Cilla Black, Ken Dodd, Les Dawson, Little and George, Pat Phoenix, Cannonball, and many other personalities and characters who came to Scarborough and who came to perform. So, you know, politics and the North Yorkshire coast and Iraqis turn up again. And if Dr. Sadka was here, I'm sure he'd like to go on to the North Yorkshire coast. Now, I mentioned that Edward told me about his uncle, Naji. And this is the passport that I was shown by Naji's daughter and son-in-law. It says that his name is Naji Yehuda Yusuf Ezra Salman, which is a wonderful Iraqi name, and I'm sure it brings warmth to anyone whose ancestors came from Baghdad. It was issued, in fact, in 1937 by the Iraqi, and they spell it IRAKI, consulate in London. And this is because he wasn't going back, but he'd been here and his passport runs out. And there are all those wonderful stamps. I think, are they the Boy King or not? Does the Boy King come later? Someone will know. But this is a passport. Pardon?
Yes. King Azi would have been in power still.
Yes, that's it. So this is a wonderful passport of Naji Yehuda Yusuf Ezra Salman of Scarborough, the Iraqi connection, and 2 more pictures. On the left is a picture of Naji taken in London, most probably when he got the passport. It was taken by the famous Jewish photographer, Jerome. He's sitting there with a box with a Magen David on, just to show that he was Jewish. And I don't know, my friend Rachel Kolsky, who's one of the great experts in London tour guides, said she hadn't seen any photos of anyone sitting on a Jewish box before, but there it is. And finally, Naji died in 1993. And if you go up to Scarborough now and you go to the cliff lift by the Crown Hotel, you'll see there's this wonderful thing in loving memory of Naji Salman, 1912 to 1993. So you're never far from Iraqis. So that's, one other thing to tell you about Naji, which is perhaps of great interest, is he married Florette Shamash. She'd originally come from Manchester. She was from another Sephardi family. They were related to the Dalals. And those of you who know Iraqis will know that Black Jack Dalal, who was one of the family, was one of the great members of the Iraqi community. There was also another relative who started off life as a Shamash, who became a peer, and who became an MP and was ennobled, and that was Lord Sheldon. And he, who was a Labour peer, was again from a Manchester Iraqi family. So again, whole stories, and again, we could have a whole lecture on that, but we have to move on. So coming back to Leeds, we wanted to have a few more stories. So this is a friend of mine from Iran, Seema Raw, who lives up the road from me. This is her picture taken in the 1960s. She was captain of volleyball at the Alliance Jewish School in Tehran. You can see that all the people that come to Leeds have personality. If you were captain of volleyball, it said something about your life. And Seema told me that she wanted to be a midwife. She came to the London Jewish Hospital, Whitechapel, which was a thing that a lot of Jewish girls came to. Again, a topic for the talk. Moroccan Jewish girls came, lots of Iranian or Persian Jewish girls came to train there. She was told that the training was the best. She then came to Leeds, and I've heard the same story from many Londoners, Jewish girls who worked as secretaries in London in the West End, people who had a good life, and when they came to Leeds, they came down with a bump, that life was a bit hard for them. And Seema said that she trained as a nurse. She came to finish, she met someone from Leeds, she came to finish her training, and she realized, that it was hard, and it wasn't necessarily the best thing for a Jewish girl from Iran to do. So she got herself some qualifications, became a medical secretary, went to university, became a counsellor, and now her son is a doctor. But, interesting pictures that people bring up when you say, what have you got from home? And one of the other things that we've heard about in recent lectures, we've heard about the Indian Jewish community. And David Israel, former chairman of the Sinai Synagogue in Leeds, told me that his father, Yosef Israel, had come from India to London in 1953. And like many people who'd arrived in the South, he moved north. And why do people move north? And after 40 years of asking people, women come for love and men for work. It's a bit of a sexist thing to say that, but I find that most people who live in London give me that reason. Not always, but often. And Yosef Israel's forte was selling the Encyclopedia Britannica. Again, you may remember that was the thing you bought to get your kids into university. He was selling the Encyclopedia Britannica, and he came to Israel, but realizing that there were better things to do, he set up adult properties, he became an estate agent, and he then became chairman of the Yorkshire Association of Estate Agents. And his son, David, has recently resigned or retired as being the president of the Sinai Synagogue, where the Sephardi 10 Commandments are. So that's Persia in India, but I've got one more picture from India. And this is a wonderful picture of Elkin Hyams, who I hope is watching us tonight, leaving Mumbai or leaving Bombay for the UK in 1963. Elkin is the guy with the flowers in the middle. All the people around him are his parents, his brothers, his sisters, most of whom have left Mumbai now, are in Eretz Yisrael, they're in Israel. And Elkin came again to London. He comes to stay first at the Jews Temporary Shelter, which was in Mansell Street, which used to be a sort of stopping off place for Sephardi Jews who came when they were old men who wanted a bit of, somewhere to start. And then he marries, and he realizes his firm sends him to Leeds, and he comes to live in Leeds, where he and his daughter and his family still live. And I like that photo that shows, Jews are all come from all over the world to Britain. It's not just from Eastern Europe. Here's a family, here's an Indian Jew leaving Mumbai, heading for the UK. So in Leeds today, what have we got? We've got lots of Sephardi Jews, and I can think of them. Gloria from Morocco, Charles and Leah from Egypt, Chaim, Ronnie, Herzl, Shalom, Udi and Yaakov, all Sephardim from India. Yosef and Elkan from Israel, Yosef and Elkan from India, Martin from Tunisia, Jerry from Turkey. I know that if I asked them, they would each say to me, if I said to them, send me to another Sephardi Jew, they would. But what we don't have is a Sephardi Kehillah. There's no rallying point for Leeds Sephardi Jews. And perhaps when we get out of COVID, we should take up the challenge of bringing the Sephardi Jews together. I'm sure we get results, and maybe I could persuade Rabbi Yoltop and Rabbi Perez to take up this challenge. My talk tonight has only been, a start. There's a lot more research, a lot more people, a lot more stories, a lot more picture. And thinking about it, what is really needed is some sort of book about modern Sephardi Jews of UK. In Yorkshire, there's a lot to write about, and I'm sure if we explored other regions of the UK, we'd find equally fascinating stories. So now it's over to you. I asked, will there be a new Sephardi community? And that's my email address if anyone wants to email me afterwards. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Nigel, for that amazing Cook's tour of Yorkshire and of the Sephardi world in Yorkshire. And let's take you up on that challenge then. Let an Ashkenazi found a proper Sephardi community in Yorkshire. What do you say to that?
I think I've got to get the Sephardim to do it themselves. I think one of the other things to remember is that many of the people that came, came 50 or 60 years ago now. If you left Egypt in 1956, it's a long time ago in many ways. And they left, and those who left other countries leaving in the 60s, but they're tremendous. I see that my friend Josephine Jackson of Once of Leeds says that they've got a Sephardi minion at Wootton Gardens once a month in Bournemouth. So again, didn't know that. But I think we've started, and now the question is, what have we missed out? What does anyone else want to tell me or ask me?
Hey, well, let's have a look and see.
Can you please ideally raise your hand in the reactions, and then I'll bring you online. That's the quickest way, or ask the questions the other way. But raise your hand in reactions is the quickest way.
Can I answer Jay? Because Jay posed a question. He said, did I do any work in the Cecil Roth archive? And the answer is no, because basically all the places I wanted to go have been shut up. We haven't done anything. Most of it's been done by people sending me photos, talking to them, emailing them. And as I said, there's a lot more to do. A lot of archives to open.
Right. David Shermer, Dorrit Shermer wants to ask a question. Dorrit, do you want to unmute yourself?
Well, that was the most amazing talk I have ever heard in my life.
Oh,
If it wasn't for the Taraganos, I wouldn't be alive. Actually, they put us up when we left Israel in Golders Green. I'm an Israeli refugee. They put us up, and when the man, I'm sorry I didn't get your name, the most amazing man that gave this lecture, he said that you could do a whole lecture on the Taraganos. Well, I'm up for that. And there is a Sephardic minyan in Sheffield, and that's where I live.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I don't know who you are. I'm sorry. It's my first time on Zoom. I don't even understand. Don't even know how I got this far. But I was just absolutely fascinated by what you said, because I've got that background, and I'm just lost for words.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Dorrit. Where in Sheffield do you live? Which part of the city?
Nether Edge.
I know Nether Edge very well.
Really?
My mum was born in a place called Townhead Street in the centre of Sheffield. She grew up in Sheffield, and like many people moved to London. My grandparents lived there, and I used to visit as a child. And I was conscious that I hadn't said anything about Sephardim in Sheffield. So we'll have to arrange for me to come and talk to you. If you email me with your address, we'll find to have a coffee sometime.
I'm in absolute shock. So maybe we could do the Sephardic Minyan on Zoom.
Well,
I'm in shock. Do you know what? You have made my year.
Well, that's wonderful.
The most interesting, fascinating, and everything you said, I related to the Taraganos and the Sephardic Minyan and Salonika. I'm just like bowled over.
Fantastic.
Well, thanks very much, Dorothy. And a lot of people have echoed your sentiments.
I can't even read. I don't even know.
Nigel. But I have to say, Nigel, you're a closet northerner. You didn't say that your mother was from Sheffield.
Yes, well, that's it. But I think my mum's watching somewhere tonight, and she left Sheffield on marriage, you know, and but she has strong northern roots.
The name Tarragano's come up tonight, and there are Tarraganos at Holland Park Synagogue. So
Yes,
more
yeah,
about
I know them.
Yeah, I don't know whether all the families are related, but there are certain names like Toledano, Tarragano. There are Sephardic names that turn up, and you know they're Sephardic, but you know I don't know all the genes. All I know is that when I met Catherine Toledano, it was just amazing. This whole huge family tree that came out. You know, I'm sitting in a cafe in a place called Cullingworth, which is not on the Jewish map in any shape or way or form, and we're looking at this wonderful family tree that links all the Sephardic world.
Fantastic. Has anyone else got a question? Lots of comments, not too many questions. And just to mention that we are going to have a lecture on Manchester. I've been looking for someone to give that lecture, and actually it's been quite hard, but I've finally found Rabbi Ariel, what's his name?
Arya Abel.
Yes, Ariel Abel. He has agreed to give a lecture on the 17th of August. Of course, Manchester was the main community that Sephardi Jews resettled in. So we look forward to that, 17th of August, and look forward to seeing you all there. Anyone else?
Can I ask you a question? Is Bella's Cafe, where Lynn spoke, still open? I remember she did lovely Sephardi food.
And where was that?
When we came up for Lynn's book.
Oh, no, she's moved on. She's moved on. She closed the cafe, and the lady who ran it, she was catering for hospital staff. She provided meals during the pandemic, and now she's doing her own catering.
Right, we have a question from Rabbi Perez. I just have to find him in the...
Yeah. And while you're finding him, Abigail Kaplan wants to know how can she access more lectures? Very simple, Abigail. You go to the Harif website, www.harif.org, and subscribe to our mailing list. You'll get all the information.
Hi, Rabbi Perez.
Hi, Nigel. First of all, I think I should give you, if I had the honors of giving a doctorate, I think I'll give you one.
Thank you very much.
On amazing, the way you've covered so much and a sea of information. I will never ever dream for me to be able to actually achieve even 10% of what you have covered. I think from an Ashkenazi background, you've done amazing for a Sephardim lecture. The second thing is you mentioned about Rabbi Shamaria, who you know very well.
Yeah.
I had the privilege before Rabbi Golem moved to took the position as a rabbi in Sheffield. Rabbi Shamaria and we actually officiated the wedding together in Sheffield. And it was, first of all, he is an incredible, I got the shock when you mentioned that he passed away recently. I had a lot of respect for him and for everything that he has done. And it's nice to actually promote Laxton Bet Shalom, who they've done so much. I remember when I was their rabbi from the beginning, before even they built the room, to where they are today. They have an incredible history, incredible soul, what they've done for, not only for the education side, even for us as a Jewish people. The knowledge and the sacrifice financially, land, everything, what they've done is incredible. First of all, as I would like just to say, thank you, Nigel. You had over 100 people turning up to your session. I've heard lectures before. They may get 50, 60 people. You beat the record, and kol hakavod, as they say in the Sephardim. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and your hard work of research with all of us.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Perez.
Yeah.
And Rabbi Perez gives a great talk. You should have him on to talk about his journey from Casablanca via a few other places to UK.
Yes.
Fascinating story.
Yeah, worth thinking about. Thank you, Rabbi Perez.
Gerald, do you want to ask a question? Do you want to tell on your video? We'd like to see people.
Actually, it's not Gerald, it's Gloria.
Gloria.
Yes. Hi, Nigel.
Hi, Gloria.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. I've really, really enjoyed your talk. And of course, as you know, I was born in Morocco and I came to England when I was 17. I can't relate to a lot of the things that you said, but, you know, I found your talk very, very, very interesting, if I can say that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Gloria. Gloria is a good friend from Leeds. As she said, she came to Morocco, you know, a Sephardi coming to an Ashkenazi world. And I think I'd be very interested to hear their perspectives of what it was like. I mean, I felt when I'd come from London to Leeds in 1976, I'd come from a strange world, come to a strange Jewish world. It was very different to London. If you come from Morocco, I think you'd have even very, very different views, especially the cold and winter.
Correct.
Yes. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think there is. Howard? Howard?
Where
We're just
go?
trying to find you.
I can't see his question.
No, he's got his hand up.
Top left, next to Rabbi Perez, I think. Is it Howard Kuckel?
Yes, Howard Kuckel.
Next to Dorrit.
Lawrence is just trying to find him. Sorry.
I can see him on my screen, you see.
Yeah. Next to Dorrit.
There we are.
Wait a minute, Howard. We can't hear you at the moment.
Howard's
Just-
unmuted.
Now now you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Can't hear him.
No, you have to unmute yourself, I think.
He's unmuted. You've got to turn on your microphone.
No,
can't hear
can't hear you. Sorry.
No mic. Type it.
Yes.
Type the question or the remark.
Type the question in the chat.
Or the remark.
Francis, do you want to ask a question? I think, yeah, Francis Troy has actually put his hand up, not an electronic hand, but a real one. And we find
Yeah, of
him.
course, I've got Francis.
Right, unmuted. Thank you. I'm wondering whether a Dr. Vining from Leeds was a Sephardi or not. He came and performed a Brit Milah in 1941. He came over from Leeds to the Lancashire border.
Right. The answer to that question is I don't know.
Right. And
Was it an Orthodox Brit or was it a?
it was an independent Brit because they were traveling to and from Synagogue wasn't allowed for an enemy alien.
Right. Because what I was going to say was one of the things that you find in Leeds is all sorts of people are there during wartime.
Mm.
And after the war, they then disappear and they go off to the States, they go back to London, all sorts of things happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, they aren't, shall we say, in the public consciousness in Leeds because they didn't stay that long.
Yeah.
And there aren't that many people around who've got clear memories now of who was who in wartime. So I can't help. But what I would say is I often think, especially if someone's, you know, an overseas national, if you stick it into the London Gazette, their name, it's amazing what turns up.
Yeah.
And certainly with one of the Sephardim, it tells you the nationality and where they were from.
And I wanted to say how much I enjoyed organizing a wedding with the rabbi, but he's disappeared.
Right.
The rabbi from Nottingham.
Rabbi Perez.
Rabbi Perez, we did a wedding together at Lauderdale Road.
Ah,
I'm the secretary for marriages.
Okay. Howard's got his hand up.
Do you want to turn down?
Yeah. Okay. Just to say, if it's a shame Rabbi Perez has disappeared, because I would have liked to tell him that it's not unusual for Harif lockdown lectures to have over 100 people, I'm glad to say. But certainly Nigel's talk does deserve, you know, at least 100.
Well, if you could hear me now, can you hear me now?
yes, I can hear you clearly.
Yes? Oh, good.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
Yes.
was, the reason it wasn't picking up before, I was playing it through the television, so it was all complicated. Okay, so I just wanted to make a small point, really, which is about our hidden Sephardi heritage, which comes out when you start doing DNA testing. And I know a lot of people who are in the genealogy world are getting their DNA tested. And I had it done many years ago. And when it was first done, I was virtually 100% Ashkenazi. But the companies that work out your origins from your DNA had very crude way of doing it. And now they've got much more refined. So I'm now down to 85% Ashkenazi and 15% that's more or less, it's Italian, Middle Eastern and North African Jewish. So when we dig into our origins, even as Ashkenazi types turn out to have a lot of Sephardi blood, just to throw that into the mix. So Yorkshire's probably full of people like me with blue eyes and gingy hair who are really a bit Sephardi.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I'm sure Lynn's got Ashkenazi roots as they went from Germany to Spain.
Yeah. Well, I am 100% Iraqi.
That's Spain.
And I've got green eyes. So there. Okay, anybody else? Oh, someone is waving. Yes. Susie. Can we, Susie? Susie Cree. Just a second. Yeah, if you can put your electronic hand up, that would be yeah.
Hi, Susie.
Yes,
Yeah.
hi.
Hi, Susie.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Great. Just a slightly different question about synagogue architecture, because it's always fascinated me why the three oldest Reform synagogues in this country were built in a Sephardi architectural style. The one in Bradford, there's West London Synagogue, and there was one in Manchester, which is no longer. And I always wondered what the Sephardi connection was there.
And Bradford's very interesting. I was going to talk about that, but you can't talk about everything. But the Reformed Synagogue in Bradford looks very much like it looks very Oriental. And let me just have a look if I can change my background. Here we are. Well, this is a picture of the Reformed Synagogue in Bradford. And it looks very, very Middle Eastern and Oriental. And very interestingly, I went to Jerba and I found the same inscriptions in Bradford that there were in Jerba. I think it was just a style of building. I think one of the other things was the synagogue in Bradford was built by people who were in the 1880s very, very wealthy. And in the past, you know, you go to the architect and the architects, in the present, you go to the architect, you say, he says, these are my plans. And you say, cut, haven't got the money. In Bradford, where there was always money, they just built to whatever his design was. They were also German Reformed Jews. They didn't, you know, they just wanted something that was interesting. So I think that's why they built this. Very interestingly, I was married in the new synagogue, as they called it, on the Chapeltown Road in Leeds. Again, it looks more like a mosque if you go and see it today. It's the School for Contemporary Dance, and it was built ashore with a minaret. You know, we didn't have a muezzin in an Orthodox synagogue, but they built it with a minaret. There are all these strange things happen, and there's a lady called Sharman Kaddish who can explain it to you. I do know one thing, that the Bradford Synagogue is built with Islamic geometric design. And while we're on, if I can find the right virtual background, here we are.
Oh, lovely.
This is actually a cake that was made for the president of the Bradford Reformed Synagogue's 90th birthday party. It was made by a very talented cake maker. But here you have a shawl that looks like a Sephardi shawl built for German Ashkenazim as a cake. What more can you want?
Nicholas, and by Perez, then Abigail.
Right. Okay. What a shame to eat a cake like that.
Yes, it's that.
So Nicholas.
Yes. First of all, Nigel, I wish you Yashar Koach.
Thank you very much.
A very interesting talk, made more interesting because, as you know, I was brought up in Bradford. And as I mentioned in the chat, I grew up with well, I will call them the name by which I originally knew them, the Bambaji family. They lived next door to my grandparents in Redburn Drive in Shipley. And the other thing is hidden, you're talking about, or someone was talking about hidden Sephardim. Well, I was brought up entirely Ashkenaz, but you might be interested to know that my great-grandmother, who was Ashkenaz herself, was a Zekuto, which has a very long lineage to Portugal and Spain. And indeed, I don't want to blow my own family's trumpet, but my ancestor, Abraham Zacuto, was Christopher Columbus's cartographer.
Wow.
So I have a long history of being Sephardi, but we were brought up Ashkenaz because my grandparents came from, they were Litvak.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as you know, there are a lot of people who've got, even today, you know, it's interesting how many people have part Sephardi heritage that somehow has been subsumed, and someone has to claim it back.
Rabbi Perez.
And actually, just I wasn't able to prompt at that moment when somebody was looking for me that they couldn't see me on the screen. I'm still here. I'm still listening to amazing so many questions, and also to the wedding that it took place in Lauderdale. I really enjoyed your company at the time, and thank you very much for all the help you have given me at that particular time. And it was a wonderful memory in a Sephardi shul. That's all I wanted to say. Just I am still with you here, listening to the last person standing.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for a wonderful and informative talk. I just wanted to ask, somebody mentioned recently that the significance of DNA, and I found 11% Italian DNA in my when I did the DNA test, and there are lots on the family tree. There's other people, and we can't find anything Sephardi, but we've got a myth in our family, on my father's side, that there's Sephardi origins, but unfortunately none of us are able to go enough centuries back to find it. But I just wondered, is that likely then that there is some Sephardi heritage that says 11% Italian?
This is about DNA, because there was a bit of distortion. I'm not an expert on all of those things. I leave it to the genealogists and the DNA specialists. And there are people, you know, if you go to any Jewish heritage conference and say, who's the DNA specialist? And someone then will sit down with you and explain it all. I'm more about talking to people. Okay.
And I think we've got Dorrit and they've spoken. Two people have already spoken who want to speak again. We've got Howard and Dorrit. So I'll do Howard first. Okay, Howard.
Unmute.
Yeah, just to reply to that question about DNA, definitely if you've got some bit of DNA there that comes up, the way these companies work, there are about 5 different companies that are doing DNA for finding relatives and for finding origins, and they have databases, and all of the databases are kind of self-described. The people who had the DNA tested, and they ask them what their origin is, and they say, I don't know, Jewish, Ashkenazi, English, Irish, whatever. And so they're very distorted by the information that people put into them, and they try and clean them up all the time. Now, some of these companies just put everybody that's got some kind of European Jewish origin down as Ashkenazi. But other ones, and the one I particularly like, is called MyHeritage, which is an Israeli company. And MyHeritage has got a very good Jewish database, which is able to separate quite a lot of Ashkenazi from Sephardi DNA. I mean, in the end, all Ashkenazis were originally Mizrahi Jews from Palestine. So somehow they've broken off as a small, originally a small subset, which became very large. But you should be able to track back through all of those. Now, if you have your origins checked, you've got to have a paper trail as well. It's no use knowing, like I now know, that I've got nearly 10% Italian Jewish. Where is that ancestor? You've got to also work on the genealogy as well as the DNA.
Okay, Dorit.
You want to say something?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's interested, but about 15 years ago, I went to the synagogue in Alexandria, and my cousin, who's a genealogist, paid that lady, Madame Atatea, I think her name was. He gave her $100, and she opened up all the records, and we've got them all on video. That's one thing. I don't know if anyone would be interested in looking at the records. We've also got videos of the Shabtai 1 and Shabtai 2 cemeteries, and we clean them up every couple of years. We go there, and I'm also 70% along the way in getting compensation for when my father had to run out of Alexandria and left a home, a business and everything. I'm 70% there, sort of trying to get some form of compensation. So I don't know if that's of any interest to anyone.
Yeah, it's very interesting for me. Can you get in touch with me? info@harif.org. And tell
my computer skills are terrible. I'm afraid I'm on my iPhone, and I don't even know how I got to this.
I'll send you in the messages. I'll send you Lynn's phone number. Okay.
Yeah. I would love to.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Was your father a British national, or what nationality did he have?
He was born in Alexandria, got kicked out, went to Israel, got kicked out because he married my mother, who was Ashkenazi, and that's why we ended up at the Tarragano's house in Golders Green, and now I'm in Sheffield. That's the story.
What nationality was he when he left?
He was an Egyptian Jew.
Yes. Yeah. Did he have Egyptian nationality or British nationality or what?
He was born in Alexandria, so he obviously got some sort of passport when they kicked him out, and he's got an Israeli. Well, unfortunately, he's not with us. Israeli and British.
Right, but that's now. So he was possibly stateless when he left Egypt.
Yeah, but I've got some sort of document, like a passporty thing.
Yes.
That I'm not quite sure what it is. That's the only Egyptian document I've got. And I've got his birth records, I think, on video, on that video I was telling you about.
Yeah.
But
that's
yeah.
We have done lectures in the past about Egypt. And in fact, one about the Exodus from Suez. We had 250 people actually to that, and there is a video recording of it on the YouTube channel, the Harif YouTube channel, which you can access from our website, harif.org.
And most of the Jews who left Egypt, because they were British nationals, actually got compensation. Yeah. Because the British froze all the money, all the assets of the Egyptians had it in the Bank of England, and
the British and the French got a little bit of compensation, not as much as they deserved, but they did get some. But everyone else didn't. So that would be very interesting to know your story. Thank you. So, Lizette, one last question. Just a sec. Lawrence is finding you.
Hang on,
Top left. Unmute.
Yes, can you unmute yourself, Lizette?
Lizette, unmute?
Unmute yourself.
Can't hear you.
Can you unmute yourself?
No.
Can you unmute?
Okay.
Now?
Yeah. Okay. I have 3 things to say. One of them about the DNA. when you mentioned my heritage is also connected to Abotenu in Israel, where they actually trace the DNAs of the fathers. They go back when the gentleman was talking about not knowing about his grandfather, if he was. So Abotenu is connected to my heritage. If you go to one, you can go to the other. This is number one. Number two, I was very interested about what the lady just said about getting compensation, about how does one go about it, because we are from Iraq and nobody that I know was able to get anything. And I had another comment which I had forgotten, but I was fascinated by the whole thing. Lynn did her DNA. Okay, I did my DNA too, with my heritage. My heritage, but it's connected to Abotenu. So for people who are interested in the DNA of the fathers and the father, the father's lineage, then it is with Abotenu, which is connected to the other.
I think, Lynn, listening to all this, I think DNA is a topic for the specialists, for those who want to do it. I think you could have a wonderful lecture on DNA. And the other one is what they in the North call compo, which is really restitution and compensation.
Yeah.
There's so much going on all those sort of things. I know that my wife was interested. Someone wrote to her because her father came from Poland, from New York, saying they could help. We sent the money, and they sent us a letter back saying thank you for the money.
Yeah, yeah.
So our parents have already passed away. They already couldn't get restitution. Yeah. I feel that I'm the youngest, say, of the family, and I'm in my 70s. So I'm hoping that sometime in my lifetime I'll get something.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's another subject for another time. I'm sure we'll come back to it. I think we will draw this meeting to a close now, and just say, well, we're all one people, whether we're Sephardi or Ashkenazi or a mixture, and we all, and our history is Jewish. So so it's wonderful to have so many Ashkenazim here, interested in Sephardi history, and hopefully Sephardis are interested in Ashkenazi history, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, and can I just finish saying, if you're going to have a staycation, lots of beautiful places to come and visit in Yorkshire. The coast, the Dales, fantastic.
Yeah, and I think you work for the Scarborough Tourist Board as well.
Can you arrange a meeting with Naz Shah to say what I think of her?
Naz Shah, we're not going to go there.
No,
okay. So Nigel, thank you so much for an absolutely brilliant talk, and not just your talk and your delivery and the images you showed, but also the hard work that you put into it. I know this has been original research that nobody has done, and therefore I think it should be the basis for a book. And I think we're all expecting you to do that now, Nigel.
Okay.
You are the expert on the subject.
Yes. Thank you, Lynn. Another task.
Another task for you. Thank you again.
Thanks a million. It was fascinating.